First, let me start by correcting the record. The separation of children and families didn't happen because it was required. That is not why the president did it. This administration is on record in saying they did this to deter people from coming. And so to knowingly separate children and families by prosecuting parents that was going to result in the separation and then mentally harm children, that's despicable. And that is why people believe that what this administration is doing is intentional. It's a belief based on all the lies that members of Congress have been told, all the lies that have been out in the public, and from what has been going out into the public. Let me start. Mr. Secretary, is there a written policy on the Remain in Mexico policy?
There's a statutory provision. There is
that
guidance
policy
to the
in writing?
field. Yes.
Can you provide us that copy?
I believe we already have provided to Congress, but
If you could give it to me, that would be fantastic.
Mr. Chairman, just a second, just provide the copy of the policy. That's all she's asking for.
okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Secretary, you are familiar with that policy, correct?
I am.
And under that policy, there are certain groups of people that are not eligible to be returned to Mexico. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and under that group, unaccompanied minors, one of them?
Correct.
Cubans?
Correct.
Mexicans?
Correct.
Vulnerable people?
Correct.
Sick, elderly?
That's discretionary, but those are categories to be considered.
LGBT?
Discretionary, but categories to be considered.
Pregnant women?
Same.
Okay, let me tell you, Mr. Secretary, I either was lied to at the border or something has changed. When I was at the border in April, I specifically spoke to Officer Blanchard with Border Patrol. He told me, he was from D.C., and he told me he wrote this policy. And he told me that pregnant women were excluded and not to be sent at the border. You come in and you talk about how you want to help protect children and they're going through this dangerous journey and keeping them safe. Well, guess what? This administration is putting pregnant women in danger. Do you know how dangerous it is to be sent to Juarez, Mexico? Do you?
I'm familiar with Juarez, Mexico, and what the government.
Well, let me tell you, Mr. Secretary, as a member of Congress, this is how dangerous it is. I can't go there without getting permission. That's how dangerous it is. Then if you go to the State Department's website, and we got a little copy of it here for you, it says Mexico, violent crimes such as homicide, kidnapping, carjacking. Oh, but then if you go to the State Department's specific website on Juarez, it asks you to reconsider your travel. So it is so dangerous to travel to Juarez that the State Department is telling people to reconsider travel because of violent crime and gang activities are widespread. U.S. government employees, and I quote, are required to retain prior approval to even go into the downtown area. But this is where you're sending pregnant women back into Mexico while they await their asylum. Do you realize that this is happening?
So the Migrant Protection Protocol.
Do you realize that pregnant women are being sent back to dangerous parts of countries that our own country tells people not to go to reconsider their travel?
So,
do you realize that's happening? That's a yes or no.
So under the Migrant Protection Protocols, we are asking people to wait in Mexico for their immigration hearing.
Okay, so I'm going to reclaim my time because this is what the American people need to know. I was lied to at the border, and this is why there is no credibility with this administration. That is why there's no credibility. All right, let me move on for a moment. The 72-hour rule. Are you familiar with the 72-hour rule?
Which one?
Well, the one that basically says that within 72 hours, children need to be processed and turned over.
You're talking about the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act rule for unaccompanied children?
Yes, the 72-hour rule, sir. Do you know how disturbing it is when the largest law enforcement agency in this country is not even following the law?
Well,
it's disturbing. You're not following the 72-hour rule, as we know, because you just had a 16-year-old child die that was being held for a week. People are being turned away at the border when they present themselves at the ports of entry. How do I know? I've been there. You have agents who are treating people like animals and in person telling them how terrible they are. How do I know? I've been there firsthand. We just saw the text messages. And an agent then hits a migrant? Is this how to be treating people who are escaping violence? Of course not. So why do people think this administration is intentionally harming children? Well, let's just look at the facts. Look at all the lies. Look at the harm done to children and their mental health. Look at the children that are dying under your watch. And you just said, Mr. Secretary, you are proud of your record. That is despicable to say. You should not be proud of a record of having 5 children die under your watch. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, could I respond to any of that last segment?
I think the lady made her own statement. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I have 5 minutes, but I'll yield you some time to respond to what Ms. Barragan said.
The one important part of what